The JCC is committed to giving our community the opportunity to hear a variety of perspectives on current events. However, we do want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed by our session leaders do not necessarily reflect the official position of the JCC. And so I am very excited to introduce tonight's presenters, Ruth Messinger and Jodi Rudoren. A bit about each of them. Ruth is the social justice activist in residence at the JCC's Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility. So I have the pleasure of working with her on a daily basis. She serves as global ambassador for the American Jewish World Service, an organization she ran from 1998 to 2016. And she is also the social justice fellow at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and is a consultant and teacher for the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York and the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. Previously, Ruth was in elected office in New York City for 20 years. Jodi Rudoren became editor-in-chief of The Forward, the nation's oldest independent Jewish news organization, in September 2019, after more than 2 decades as a reporter and editor at the New York Times. Ruth and Jodi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl, we have a question. You will monitor the chat and start firing questions at us?
Yes, I will. And I can do that whenever you're ready. So just let me know.
Well, we think that people should post their questions as soon as they want, and you should interrupt us when it's time that there are questions.
I will respectfully interrupt you when I have questions then.
Okay, and can we start now? Okay, so Jodi, I'm going to start by asking you a question. Most of the people on this screen know vaguely, at least, that I was in elected office, so they understand at some level why this is a passionate topic for me. But I think you should explain why it's a passionate topic to you and or to the Forward.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, and thanks, Cheryl. And thanks for that. That's a great question. Actually, Ruth, it's funny because I asked you to write a piece for The Forward about why this election matters, not only for New Yorkers, but really for American Jews everywhere. And we spoke a lot about it, and it turned out to be a great piece. And it's partly because New York is such a central place for culture of American Jewish life, whether it's because of the museums, because of this mass population, because of the number of synagogues and other institutions in New York, and also, frankly, because of the extent of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence that plagued some Brooklyn neighborhoods, particularly at the end of 2019. But look, I guess I would start by just the critical importance of civic engagement as a core Jewish value. And I think that really Jews should be engaged in elections kind of wherever they live and in civic life wherever they live. And then I think the next thing is that this election, I suppose, is really the first major election in the country, kind of it's not quite post-pandemic, but as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic or begin to emerge. And, it's also, we're emerging from so many things, right? It's emerging from the Trump era, it's recovering from the pandemic, and it's, coming on a year since the killing of George Floyd and the beginning of a new phase in their kind of racial justice movement. And I think for all of those reasons, what happens in New York, what happens in this kind of capital of American culture and of Jewish culture is just critically important to everybody.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it was fun to write that piece for The Forward, but I guess from my point of view, and I hope that that's why many people are on and will have questions, but I think it's important for us to try to focus people's energy. Now, obviously, this is one of those situations. If you've chosen this program, then perhaps you don't need any of the things that we're going to say. But each of you is a person in your own right who talks to a lot of other people. And yes, it's sort of post-pandemic, but people have been somewhat consumed with the pandemic and the way their last 14 months have gone. That's one challenge. And another challenge is that virtually everybody that we want to reach in New York was appropriately, of course, hugely consumed with the federal election, the national election of 2020. And it's like, I think for most people, it's like, okay, thank God we got through that. We have a different administration in Washington. And now here we are all of a sudden saying to everyone, not only is there a New York City election, but it's probably, and now we're sharing opinions, folks, the most significant election for the city of New York in the last 50 years. So I have a lot of reasons why I think that's true. You might want to comment on your own perspective first, and then I'll share some of my thoughts.
Well, I feel like politicians kind of always say that. People who are running for office always say this is the most important election of our lives. So why don't you just jump right? I want to hear why you think this is more important than when you ran for mayor.
Okay, it is. So the first thing is simply the scope of the election process. Because New York City has term limits, and we can discuss the implications of that if we want to later on. But what it means is that by and large, people who get elected get reelected for their next terms. And then when the limit comes, all of a sudden there's a vacancy because the incumbent can't run. And cyclically, we're at a point right now where we have, for those people who don't have it quite in mind, we have 3 citywide offices. 2 of them will be vacant, and we will be picking a new person to fill the seat of mayor and the seat of controller. And although there are other elections, which we'll talk about later, for borough president, for district attorney, it's also true that the city council, someplace between 2/3 and 3/4 of the council members, current council members, can't run for re-election. So what that means is that we're going to have and some of them, of course, have been doing wonderful things, some of the candidates for a long time, some of them have been in elected office, but we're going to have a real new city government. And so that's a challenge for everybody. It's a chance for us to shape who we want to have shaping that new city government. But I think beyond that, the reason I said it was so critical is that let's just a few things that we're facing as a city. One, the focused attention on issues of race, racism, difference according to race. In some ways, the coronavirus first brought that to light because it was so dramatic that the healthcare services were different. And that's a vast problem for a city, but particularly again for New York because of our very mixed population. And then while people were focused sort of on all of the health and public health issues brought on by the virus, it gradually dawned on everybody, I think nobody on this seminar would doubt this, that it's a huge economic crisis. And so that's one of the reasons that I sort of said 50 years, because 50 years or so ago, we were in a whole meltdown in New York on a fiscal basis. And the question was, would the federal government help New York or not? We don't want to revive those days. But here we are now, wherever you live in New York, you know that businesses have closed. Small businesses have been particularly challenged. Storefronts are closed. People's lives have changed. Some people have been working without literally going out of their houses for 14 months. That's all going to start shifting. So the new administration, the current administration, which is still in place for the next 6 months, or 8 months, but then the new administration will have the challenge of how do you bring New York back? And as you bring it back, are there things you want to change? Are there things you want to do differently? Do you want more focus on issues of difference by race and class? What do you want the city to do? But how is the city going to revive economically? So I see that as a fiercely important issue. And it includes, are there things that we've learned from the pandemic that we want to keep? And I'm sure everyone on this webinar has something that they can't wait to never do again, but maybe some things about the life of the city that they'd like to see stay in place. So that's part of what we'd like to hear from people. So, I think we have health issues to worry about. We have broad questions of social justice to worry about. And then I mentioned the racial differences exposed by the pandemic, but obviously since then we've been through these, what I would almost call, national dramatic crises with George Floyd, with the question of policing, and all of those affect the city of New York. So it is a critical election.
I want to get back to the issue of public safety in a sec, but I really want to, you talked about the way that term limits are going to create this huge turnover in the city council and in some of the other offices. We actually are in the midst of doing a survey. We partnered up with the New York Jewish Agenda to do a survey of everybody running for council, or whoever wants to participate. It's something like 300 candidates. It's completely dizzying. It's like almost impossible to keep track. And then on top of that, we have this new system of voting for the mayor's office of ranked choice voting, which is, I think, really good for democracy, but really confusing. And local elections in general have these like stunningly low turnouts. I think we were expecting something like 700,000 people to vote in this election, and that's clearly, significantly less than 10% of the residents of the city, and really not a reasonable facsimile of democracy. So I guess it's interesting because I think term limits also, again, supposed to be good for democracy, but we're going to end up, I know you said this already, but like surely everybody on this webinar is super interested in this election and probably has figured out how to follow it. And certainly you know more about these candidates and this process than the average New Yorker. But what would you suggest for, Jane citizen, who's like trying to be a good citizen and just cannot make heads or tails of this crazy patchwork of people and issues and processes?
Okay, so we'll come back to ranked choice voting in a minute, but let's just talk about the answer to Jodi's question of getting informed. And I want to say, politely to everyone on this webinar, it's not that complicated. It requires a little bit of probing and research by you, but it's really, of course, as close as your laptop. Just I'll give you some numbers on the mayoral election. I think originally something like 34 people filed that they were going to run for mayor. And Jodi and I were talking about that 6 months ago, and that's lunatic. But of course, then they didn't really all file, and they're not all really running. I think there are actually 12 people, maybe 13, who will be on the ballot. And with great respect to 4 or 5 of them, nobody has ever heard of them. So the world has decided that there are 8 candidates. Now, 8 candidates is bewildering. I agree with you, but it's not that bewildering. If you look at the newspapers and the magazines, I'm always incensed, so I should say that. The candidates have been out there for a year, and I'm wondering why every newspaper, I'm talking mostly about the dailies now, isn't covering them from the day they start running. But that's because I'm passionate about politics and because I was a candidate. More to the point, starting right about now, 5 to 6 weeks left, the front page of the New York Times Sunday Review is like, do you know where the candidates stand? The Daily News has a double-page spread today. Do you know where the candidates stand? And an interesting essay about the candidates by Errol Lewis, who is a distinguished New York City newscaster. Several magazines have picked up talking about one candidate or another. So the simple answer to people is like, we can post for you, because Cheryl's behind the scenes, we can post for you the names of the 8 people who are running for mayor that are visible candidates. The JCC had a mayoral forum, which Jodi emceed for us. That's available, but every candidate has a website, and there are continuing forums of the candidates, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, but there are official forums, because this is, I think, one of the, Jodi was talking about democracy. I want to say there's a two-parter here before we get to ranked choice voting, which I know some of you are interested in. But before we get to that, there's a 2-part investment in democracy that's been made by New York City. One is we have, and I'm going to say this with a little bit of immodesty because that had something to do with it, but I think we have the best public finance of any urban election in the country. State of Maine is almost all the elections in the state of Maine have public match to private dollars raised, and there are some other cities, but in New York City, just so everyone is clear, there is a limit to how much a candidate can spend if they want to be part of the public system. And if they want to be part of the public system, there's a limit to what each individual can give them as a donation. And the donation is matched 8 to 1. So if you give a candidate for the city council I think the limit is $175, don't quote me, but they then get that amount plus 8 times that amount when they file that they've been seriously fundraising. So that opens up a lot. That opens up the races. Jodi, you said there were 300 candidates for city council. Some of those people are people who would not have had a hope of running if they had to raise all the money themselves, but they're told if you raise a fair amount of money from a limited number of with a limited amount by individuals, but get a certain number of individuals giving and file that, then you become eligible for the match. And the reason I mentioned that right away is because the second half of that requirement is if you are part of the public dollar match, then you must participate in the official forums. So there are 3 mayoral forums. The first one was on New York 1 this past week with 3 newscasters, journalists doing the questioning, and there will be 2 more. So it's not as if they're going to all come to your living room, folks, and sit around and tell you what they would do for the city, but the information as to who's running and what they believe is accessible on the web, and there are going to be more public events right now and additional forums, and so you can get informed. And then I just want to say, Jodi mentioned 300 candidates for city council. That's from the perspective of the forward, but in your own district, folks, there are, again, maybe, I think there are some districts where there's no incumbent, where there are 5 or 6 candidates. That may be true in many of the council districts, but you can do a little bit of sussing out and figure out who's who. And last point about this, as the pandemic sort of unleashes new energy, the candidates are likely to be out on the streets in the next 4 weeks. So you can,
it's funny, Ruth. I mean, they are coming to our living rooms. We're in your living rooms right now. I didn't watch the debate on Thursday night. I queued it up on YouTube over the weekend. So it is definitely easier than ever if you're motivated. There's plenty of stuff out there. But so I see Jerry Lieberman is asking the question on everybody's mind about like what's going on with ranked choice voting. And I'm going to offer I'm going to try to explain it, and you tell me if I screw it up. Okay.
Fair enough.
I think I've got the basics, but then I want to ask you a question about how people should think about it. So, because I really love this system in theory. I think it sounds great, and I've actually tried to deploy it in my own family and in my own newsroom for how to make other decisions, right? Because the idea is, somebody's first choice gets balanced against other people's second or third choices. So everything's weighted. So you kind of it's an easier way to build like what is truly the kind of collective wisdom of the crowd. So every individual voter can vote for up to 5 candidates, right? For mayor. And right. Whereas in the old days, before ranked choice voting, you could win with a plurality, or you would force a runoff actually, right? Between the top 2 vote getters. This allows us to have one election, one primary election, and only one. And somebody has to eventually get over the 50% mark. So here's how it's going to be, if I understand this correctly. You send in your ballots with your top 5. They count everybody's first choice first. One of these 8 or 12 candidates lands on the bottom. All of their first choice votes get discarded, and they look at who's number 2 on their ballots. And then those number 2s get allocated among the rest of the people. And they keep doing that, dropping the bottom person and going to the number 2 or the number 3 if they're already been at the number 2. And until we get to somebody combining their first choices, second choices, third choices of who they are, gets over the 50% mark. Wasn't that?
That was brilliant. That was brilliant. So I'm going to add a few things to that. First of all, there's ranked choice voting in council races also. There's ranked choice voting for every city race. We're going to talk in a few minutes later on about the district attorney's race in Manhattan, which does not have ranked choice voting. And we'll get to that and explain that. But let's leave that aside. Jodi gave you a great explanation. I really want to make it. I want to first say what happens, which she referenced, when we don't have ranked choice voting. We used to say in many of these elections, candidate has to get 50% of the vote, or 50% plus 1 is the language. And so if you have 8 candidates, and you can do the math, but let's say they're sprinkled around between 10 and 30%, then the votes come in, nobody has 50% plus 1. And so you take the top two and do a runoff. All of us have, I was going to say participated, but I'm going to be a little more careful. All of us have been in this city where there were runoff votes, when there were runoff votes. But the problems with a runoff election are that as bad as the turnout is in the original primary, it plummets. So somehow, I don't know, people go out to lunch, they figure they've cast their vote, they either do or don't like the two remaining people, but they don't show up. So runoff elections, which are hugely expensive because it's very expensive to run an election in New York City, have very low turnout. And so one candidate emerges and she or he can say, I got 50% of the vote, but at that point it's 50% of a very low turnout. So we want to maximize turnout in the first round. Oh, and I should add something, folks, because we're being a little unfair here. The vote that we're talking about is on June 22nd. And June 22nd is officially the date of the primary and not the election. So I want to correct anything I've said to mislead. The election is in November. It is not always.
The reason that we're doing that, shorthanding it, is because the Democratic primary in New York in general is conclusive
Right.
for the mayoral election. And in this case, are there not any Republican declared candidates?
There are two Republicans that you'll start to see them battling with each other, Fernando Mateo and Curtis Sliwa. And it'll be an interesting punching match, I would like to say. But whichever one of them emerges, and this is a year in which everyone knows that whoever wins the Democratic primary will be the Democratic candidate for mayor in November, but will also be the next mayor. So we're focusing our.
Let me ask you about ranked choice voting. So I want to know, you really did lay out what's wrong with the other system. But so I want to hear, do you think that it's better to have ranked choice voting in the city than not? And what would you say, two big questions of like, how would you advise a voter to think about their ranked choices? And what effect do you think the fact that there's ranked choice voting has had on the race so far?
Okay, so those are fantastic questions. So first I want to say to the point of the voter, Jodi was saying she's done this in some places. I want to say, really, this is true. This is as simple as when you turn to your partner, spouse, partner, friend, and you say, I'd like an ice cream. And they say, what flavor? And you say butter pecan. And then if they're really smart, because they're going to go to the store for you or they're going to go to the refrigerator for you, they say, what if there is no butter pecan? Then what's your second choice? That's what we're talking about. All of us are like, how come I can't make a second choice on a lot of these things? Here you can make a second choice and a third and a fourth and a fifth choice. So, and I want to talk about it. I'm going to answer your question in a minute, Jodi, but I want to talk about it from the point of view of each individual. If you wish, you can just vote for one person and your vote will count for that person. And if that person happens to be the winner, okay, and I want to add, by the way, if one candidate gets 50% of the vote plus one in the first round, then they never go to the other choices. That's so unlikely to happen right now that we're not talking about it, but I should indicate to you that it's possible. Okay, but as for the individual, so you can vote for one candidate, or you can say, I'm looking at the candidates and there are two that I'm really torn between. And I have to decide whether to rank them one or which way to rank them. One is one and one is two. And I'd like some advice about how I make that choice. And I'll come back to that later if you remind me. But I just want to say to the individual, so you can vote for one, you can vote for two because you're focused on two and you like one and you like those two, but you don't feel like you know the rest. Or you can do the homework we were talking about and decide, okay, looking at these 8 candidates, here are the 5 that I like in this order. And I want to be really clear here, folks. You can also decide for yourself, okay, I'm picking the names of the people whose names on the screen. So these are not real candidates. You can say, okay, I like Sarah Miller and Harry Green as my top 2. But with all due respect, I don't want Cheryl or Ruth or Jodi to win. So I know the 2 that I like, and I know 3 others that I frankly don't know very much about, but I'm going to put their names on the ballot because I don't want the ones that I don't like to win. That's we all play that game in life, and you can do that here. Now you're asking, what's the benefit or what's the impact on the election. So first of all, sorry to say this, folks, because I think we are all a little overwhelmed with the state of the world and the state of politics, but there's lots here that we don't know. That is, we don't know turnout. When Jodi said that, I said to her before 700,000, that's a guess. That's what people think. We don't know if turnout will be, quote, high or low. We don't know how many of the people who turn out will use ranked choice voting. And so we can't begin to tell you what its impact will be for sure. I can tell you a couple of things. I'll tell you the worst thing first. The worst thing first is, God bless New York, is that we are not ready to do all of this by computer. I don't quite know how ready we are or aren't, because the city isn't making it clear, but it is likely or possible, since we don't know how the votes are going to split, that it may take time before we know who wins. Because if you heard Jodi's process, it clearly can be done by computer, but there are 8 or 12 candidates. They'll go to the lowest ones. They'll distribute their votes. It's not yet clear to me if any of it is going to be done by hand, in which case it takes time. By the way, for those people who are as old as I am, very few of you, we had ranked choice voting in the school board elections in the 1960s and 70s, and it worked very well. So I want to put in a strong word for it. I like it. But now Jodi asked the most interesting question, really, which is what is the impact of ranked choice voting on the campaign right now? And here is the answer to that. It means less negative campaigning. When we did the mayoral forum and Jodi was the MC, Jodi said to me and Cheryl, we were delighted to have her as MC, and she said, oh, I have these 8 candidates here. I'm going to ask them who is their second choice. And I said to Jodi, they're not going to tell you now. And by the way, they're still mostly not answering that question. They were asked that the other night.
But there was this great moment, Ruth, a couple of weeks ago, I think, where Andrew Yang said, I would hire Catherine Garcia to run the city for me or something like that, right? And she said, she responded by saying, well, just vote for me then. And I was thinking, I feel like this has happened in other campaigns that I've covered or something like it. And I was thinking to myself, this is really interesting because I think, you can have your cake and eat it too in ranked choice voting, right? You can, obviously every individual is going to make a choice. They don't get to really actually decide the system, but it would be perfectly reasonable for someone to say, I like Andrew Yang and I like that he likes Catherine Garcia and I'm going to put her number 2. And I'm hoping that he's going to hire her as his chief of staff in a way that you can't do in the presidential election or presidential primary. And that brings me to this other thing we talked about earlier, Ruth. And
I want to finish the point I was making. That's true. What you said is just true. But you will see, I think, folks, in every forum from now on that some MC or newscaster will say, can any of you tell us who you think should be ranked number 2? And what I'm saying is that because of that, they're being a little bit nicer to each other.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I have to say, I think when we asked it, actually a couple of them have had to leave early. So it was late in the forum. And I'm pretty sure Scott Stringer was the only one who answered the question. Am I remembering that right?
No, I don't remember who.
I'm going to look up my notes, but and I'm going to be watching it. Cheryl may know. So Cheryl, do you remember?
I thought it was Sean Donovan.
It might have been Sean Donovan. And who did he say?
And I have a question. Finish, and then I have a question. I have a follow-up question.
I think he might have said Wiley. But anyway, what I was struck by with that was, for me, and I'm going to be watching it in the forums as we get closer, because it did seem to me that I was asking it a little early in the game. But I agree with Ruth that there was this really interesting banter developing among them and this kind of much less negative campaigning. But I also thought it was just said something about Sean Donovan's character, that he was willing to answer it honestly. And I will definitely be watching in the, forums that are much closer to the primary. I just think they should answer. They should absolutely answer. And that would show that they understand how this election is different. You have a question from the audience, Cheryl?
Yeah, you guys, you've answered a lot of questions about ranked choice voting, but there's one that's come up that I just wanted to make sure you get to, which is, does it favor one or more of the candidates in any way?
So the answer is, we don't know. it's entirely possible. So here's so here is a possibility. A possibility is that one of the candidates, and you can pick your own. I could say this could be true about 3 or 4 of these candidates who are running, is somebody who's like, okay, not my most favorite person, but a good fallback. So there is a likelihood that we would, if we could examine all the ballots, we're not going to get to examine them that way, but it might show up. It might be that when you go to, it's hard for me to do this, Cheryl, because I don't want to name people who are going to be at the bottom. So I'm gonna pick. So it might be that, so Jodi Rudoren is a really exciting candidate, but people are sort of aware that she hasn't been around on the political scene that much, but they love her. But a lot of people who vote for Jodi then Jodi might tell them, hey, look, if I don't win, that's what we're talking about right now, then my next choice would be Cheryl. And so then if Jodi indeed doesn't win and she gets at some point to be the lowest person left, all of a sudden there's going to be a bunch of votes for you because she's urged people to do that. So there will be likely some people naming a second choice, but even without that, there will be some people popping up. So for example, I'm trying not to name names, but newspapers, the three newspapers, city newspapers, have all endorsed candidates. So somebody might say, my candidate wasn't endorsed and I like my candidate better than any of the candidates. I'm voting for my candidate number 1. But maybe the Post or the News or the Times have something to recommend them. So I'm going to vote for that candidate second. So here's what I want to say. It is entirely possible. This is the one thing I'm going to say that's going to confuse people. And I don't want it to confuse you, but I'm going to say it. When we get the results, I'm going to try and do this with 3 candidates, A, B, and C, apple, butter, and cherry. When we get the results, the 3 candidates could be pretty evenly split. So let's say apple has 30% and butter and cherry each have 35%. That equals 100% in my brain. And they say, oh, nobody has a winner, but apple is going to be, oh wait, I should have done it a little differently. I should have said, let me try it again. Cherry has 40% of the vote. Butter has 35% of the vote. And apple has 25% of the vote. And people will say, oh, look, cherry is ahead of butter and apple is the lowest. And it could easily be that when apple's votes are counted, they all go to butter. You all following me? So the
butter goes over the top. So
I just want to repeat that. I want to be sure that, because I don't want to confuse people. By the way, once we voted, guys, June 22nd, and if you haven't registered to vote, you can still register to vote till May 28th. Cheryl will post those dates. But once we voted, whether you decide to do the full Monty, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you just do 3 because you know them, or you just do 1 because you don't get why this is a good idea. Once that's happened, it's out of our hands. But I'm saying when the votes are counted on the night of June 22nd, it could be, oh, somebody is ahead. So even though that person doesn't have 50%, I'm assuming that that person will be the winner. And that is totally false. Because depending on how the ranked choices go, people who are second and third and perhaps even fourth on the first night can leap ahead and suddenly be, by the way, ranked choice voting exists in the council races as well. And I just want to give you one example, Jodi. You were asking like sort of what's the benefit. So there was a special election in the Bronx. I endorsed a candidate. 2 or maybe 3 of the candidates, but anyway, 2 of the candidates went out in the last few weeks before the special election. This was the first ranked choice voting election in the city. And they said, we endorse each other. We all want you to vote for me number 1, but if you don't vote for me number 1, vote for her number 2. And it happens that the candidate that I endorsed did not survive, but there is still an election. And the candidate who my candidate ranked number 2, that candidate called me last week and said, well, your candidate didn't win, but she liked me the next, so will you now endorse me? So that was just a very good example of kind of a different level of camaraderie among the candidates than usually exists. I want to interrupt because we have actually a guest on the show. So I just want to welcome one of the candidates for Manhattan District Attorney. The Manhattan District Attorney race is not covered by ranked choice voting. So in a sense, we're going to see the stark examples each way, because there are either 7 or 8 candidates for Manhattan District Attorney, no ranked choice voting. So the winning candidate could win with a relatively small percentage of the vote. And I don't know if she has a question or a statement she wants to convey to you, Cheryl, but we want to welcome Tali Farhadi and Weinstein, who is on the call and is a candidate for Manhattan District Attorney.
Sorry, can I keep going on the ranked choice for just another second? Because I have both a really simple, straightforward question, and then I have a comment, which is on the question, is it clear yet, Ruth, if they will announce kind of who wins each round? And will they announce like in terms of the number 1 rankings, the person with the most is this, the person with the least?
They have to announce. The answer to that is yes. I have no idea. I never know in this city how things are going to get covered, but they and certainly New York One is. I want to do a shout out for New York One. This is not a commercial. It's a commercial. I just want to say New York One has been vigorously covering these elections. They really. I know it's not all of you get it, but I just want to say that they have mayoral reporting every night. They cover the candidates out there on the stump. They cover the forums, and they're doing it for every council race in the city, every borough president race. They're really the district attorney. They're doing a great job of coverage. But they, I'm sure, the answer to your question, Jodi, is yes. It's required at the end of each round, and I think New York One will be, if this is an election, which it could be, that goes several rounds, some of these elections, we will get the best, clearest reporting, New York One. But yeah, they'll say at the end of the first round, we've discounted the 4 people who are on the ballot that nobody knows, and here's a small change, and then they'll have to do it each time.
It should be fun. I mean, it's better than watching the ballots get. I wonder if they should have I hope we get one of those cool boards at New York One, like they have on CNN, to go county by county. Anyway, but here's my comment. I mean, as you started to say, we obviously do not know how it's going to go, how it will advantage or disadvantage for candidates. And I appreciated the scenarios you laid out. It seems to me, look, in local elections, in low kind of engagement elections, vote name recognition is always so huge, and we've seen that play out already here. You know, Andrew Yang, who obviously had run for president and had really strong name recognition, started out kind of way ahead in the polls. That has flattened out now. You know, after a lot of campaigning, I think that there's a dynamic. I'm just guessing here, but here's a dynamic that I think could happen, which is that there'll be some candidate who maybe is the front runner, or maybe even a couple of front runners who lots of people will vote for as their first choice. And maybe fewer people will vote for that person as their second choice, because they're kind of like, that person is a little bit more of the kind of yes or no, you know, people feel like yes or no about them. Whereas the people who are a little bit lower in the polls, or in that kind of vast middle of these 8 or 12 people will be like, sure, like they could be 2 or 3 or 4, like it's that it'll be a little bit more of a polarization around whoever the top candidate seems to be around election day, that you feel kind of yes or no about them. And that also brings me to this larger point that I really want to talk about, and I'm interested in your take on, because I feel like with all elections, there's usually a little bit of I don't know if tension is the right word, but there's kind of leadership and experience management. There's kind of inspirational leadership on one side and experience management on the other side. And we all wish that we could have candidates, particularly for executive offices like mayor or president, who really combined both, who really seemed like, you know, the kind of person we'd want to lead us, you know, through a crisis. And also, I guess you might want a manager or a leader to lead you through a crisis. I remember when I was covering the 2004 presidential campaign, a lot of more veteran political journalists and analysts kind of told me that the real thing people vote on when they're voting for president is kind of who they want to have in their living room for 4 years, who they can imagine talking to them, making speeches, et cetera. And I think that the New York mayoral race, the New York mayor's office has a bit of that, right? They have that bit of, I mean, think back to 9/11, or you think to other kind of moments in the city's history where that person is kind of a real national figure, a spokesperson, an inspirational leader. And yet we also know that this is a very complicated bureaucracy, a very big bureaucracy, complicated city government. And as we talked about earlier, facing numerous economic, health, other crises. So I think it's a really interesting question as to whether will voters pick kind of inspiring leader or a more competent manager. And when I was watching the debate, you could see that there's sort of a split in terms of who each candidate is trying to be for voters. There's ready on day one is Scott Stringer's slogan. He's like the most experienced. Catherine Garcia is making the same kind of pitch. I've managed the city through crises. And I wonder how you see that split in terms of that inspirational leadership versus competent manager in terms of what the candidates are talking about and what voters want.
First of all, I think your analysis is correct. For most candidates, that is kind of, they're offering some combination of their vision and their experience and their skill and competence. And that's when, when I say it's easy to find the candidates, it's easy to read their position papers, but you're talking about a deeper issue, which is like, what are the real strengths of this person to take on this job? So I think it's understandable that people are sort of looking for who they'd like in their living room, especially for those people who weren't happy for the last 4 years with who the president was in their living room. But I want to say, you sort of said tentatively, this is a complicated job. So I think it is not my bias. It's said by many, many, many other people that being the mayor of the city of New York might be the second hardest job in the nation next to president. And just as a starter, I would say to people, think very fast. We're not having a contest here about what you guess to be the budget of the city of New York. And in a minute or two, I'll tell you what the budget of the city of New York is. But certainly, as Jodi points out, it's a huge bureaucracy. And just think about, like the last week, it's like, what do we do about our environment? What do we do about public safety? What do we do about the issue of race and racism? What do we do about the police department and how the police budget should be? I mean, Cheryl and I will be happy to tell you, we've been doing programs on these issues for the last 2 years out of the Stern Center for Social Responsibility, great discussions with people. Who care if you're, it's very often the case that, when you talk about the schools, which I've been talking about for 40 years, people say, oh, well, I don't have children in the schools. And I'm like, what? Why would that be an issue for you? Obviously, parents care intensely, but you're living in a city with 1 million children in public school. And clearly the future of the city depends on the quality of those schools. So how can you not care about that? But so people have a lot to balance. So I was talking about, like, which issues are most important to you and one of the candidates there, but Jodi is absolutely right. It's also a question of competence. So folks, the budget of the city of New York is $99 billion. Right, Jodi's look is exactly right. I hope that's the look on all of you. It's a huge, complicated bureaucracy with a vast number of people working for city government. And even in calm times, being the mayor is, like, in my mind at least, a 24/7 job that requires some combination, just to pick up on what Jodi said, of leadership and vision and the skill and competence and experience. And I am now going to get myself in trouble. So just beware, Cheryl. I am going to say that it disturbs me that the candidate who has been miserably ahead in the polls recently, so far, Andrew Yang, who's there ahead in the polls because he ran for president, but Andrew Yang has never voted in a New York City mayoral election. And for me, that's like, not that it's a requirement, folks, but that should tell you something about his orientation toward New York City. Okay, now I've gotten myself in trouble. Cheryl, you have questions for us? Go ahead.
You're not in trouble, but I do have a question for you related to that's come up in a variety of ways. How would you advise an undecided New Yorker what would you advise them to look for in sorting through the candidates? And what do you see as the most important attributes required to be mayor in New York City?
So, so some of this is personal. Some of this picks up on what Jodi said, is like, it's not just who you want in your living room, it's who you want. I'm going to put it differently. It's who you want responding to a crisis. So I'm not picking on these candidates right now. This is more of a national issue, but this pandemic stuff was really terrifying for all of us. And the question is, who do you want to be right there responding? And I'll just do it generically. Do you want somebody who's going to say the first thing that comes to their mind? Yes or no? You know, we can fight this, we can beat it. We should put children in school. We should put children out of school. We should open vaccination centers in Citi Field. We should, from my point of view, I'm really looking for somebody who in their life has dealt with crises and has dealt with them thoughtfully. Because shoot from the hip style, which we have in a very large number of our elected officials around the country, sometimes, Jodi, it's what passes for like clever leadership. Oh, there's my person out there saying what she or he thinks immediately. But sometimes, folks, that doesn't work. These are complicated issues. So that's one thing. The second thing, Cheryl's, and my answer to the question, and then I'll let you ask other questions, is I look at, yes, what the person has done previously, which matters to me a lot, particularly for a job like this. But I also look about when they have gone against the tide. Okay, I was an elected official for 20 years. I thank all the people on this screen. I had the privilege of representing many of you for 2 decades. I can, and I hope someday to write about this, but I can tell you the times when I voted against what everybody thought I would do or against the tide. And I want you to know it's hard. People, it's a democracy, folks. People love to tell you what they think. There were a couple of issues on which people wrote me or organized letter campaigns. Dear Ruth, I disagree with your borough president. I disagree with your position, and I will never vote for you again for anything. And I know you can all call me crazy, but I actually wrote all those people back and said, I'm sorry we disagree on that issue, but please don't say you will never vote for me again, because that's like throwing away a vote. It's not easy to take unpopular positions. You might someday want someone representing you who takes unpopular positions. So when I have defended the candidates that are my candidates, and I have candidates in many of these races, I promise you that one of the things I've looked at is like, when have they taken real leadership on an unpopular issue and seen it through?
So can I jump in there for just a sec, Cheryl? Before we go, I really think that last thing that Ruth said is really important. And it just reminds me of probably the best advice I ever got about political reporting, which is from the great Adam Nagurney, who I'm sure a byline that many of you know. And when I was covering the John Kerry race against George Bush in 2004, what Adam said, he's like, well, what you are doing is telling people about how they make decisions. That is the key thing that voters need to know. How will this person make decisions? And as Ruth said, particularly in a crisis. So I would really encourage you, and hopefully the news organizations, ours and others, will write about turning points that in the candidates' lives when they've made tough decisions, or as Ruth said, when they've gone against and taken an unpopular position. I also think, I really think that if you watch the debate or any of the forums, you do get a sense of how the person makes decisions. And someone wrote in the chat something about being scripted. Do you like somebody who's more scripted or less scripted? I mean, I think there's a way to judge the sort of character and decision making as well as the experience. And I do think that's a fair way to make a choice, as long as it's not based on like a 30-second paid ad. It's based on some real level of seeing the person in operation. I think what's interesting though, Ruth, is that one thing that you didn't mention, and I think there were some things in the chat about this too, you didn't really mention go study the issues you care about most and all of their positions. And I suspect that's because the daylight between most of their positions on most of the issues is not huge.
Is not, oh, well, I think that's probably somewhat true, but not entirely true. I think, and I guess I want to now contradict myself before, because sometimes in these debates and forums, the MCs or moderators are going for the easy question. So for example, I understand why they're doing this, but most of the forums, and I've watched an innumerable number of forums, and Tali will tell you that there have been 4,000 DA forums, but they resort to that. At some point they do these 5 minutes of like, oh, let's do a quick hand raising, what's it called, a lightning round. Now, when Jodi was doing lightning rounds, some of it was like, what's the last book you read? That kind of thing is interesting. But for me, when there's a lightning round question that says, you know, will you ever prosecute a fare beater? That's like crazy. And the candidates,
especially on Zoom,
the candidates that I like are sitting there saying to the moderator, that's too complicated a question. I can't put up my hand. And the moderators are saying, just put up your hand, yes or no. So that's not really helpful to the public. I want to say one other thing.
Zoom if everybody's raising their hand.
I want to say one other thing, because I've probably implied this before, but I want to say it loudly. I said, look at experience. Obviously, not everybody has to have experience, but I'm troubled when people talk about people running for office and say something like, oh, well, they just always run for office. So I want to say to those of you out there who are lawyers, you probably have practiced law for 20 to 35 years. Those of you who are teachers, you are committed to education, and that's what you do. Public service is an honorable calling. And when I ran for mayor, I will talk personally. I ran for mayor in 1997. Some of you will remember I did not win. But I ran that campaign thinking literally at every stop, at every place I stood up, okay, how much of my 20 years in public office as city council member and borough president have prepared me for this? Am I ready enough to take on this job? And so frankly, when people drop in by parachute from outer space and say, I'd like to be your district attorney, and no, I've never prosecuted anybody, or I'd like to be your mayor because I love the city, I'm like, give me a break. So.
Thank you.
Okay, Carol, more questions.
Okay, so we have only 2 minutes. So I just want to make sure there's a bunch of questions here about how the DA race works. And I just want to make sure people are left with absolute clarity about that, because it is different. And so the question is, does a simple plurality decide that race, or is there a runoff? And then that's followed up with why are they different, to paraphrase, and why are they different given it's such an important race?
Okay, so I mean, if Tali wants to post a quick answer that you can read it, that would be fine. District attorney, for reasons that I'm not an expert on, is considered a part of the state system of criminal justice. So it's sort of, even though it's borough by borough district attorney, it's considered in the universe of state elections, not city elections. State elections don't have ranked choice voting, so that election does not have ranked choice voting. So it's a plurality.
Will it have a runoff?
No. Okay, so Tali just posted very quickly that I'm correct and that it's a separate page in your ballot. Okay, then somebody just asked, I'm trying to do this fast. I saw a question about
what's the comptroller?
Comptroller and what kind of background they need to have. That's a complicated one, because the comptroller, which sort of sounds like a straight fiscal position, is really much more complicated than that. It is the person who does the audits and holds the city agencies accountable on every front. The people who do the adding up the numbers are in the controller's office. They are civil servants. They know their number stuff. So no, you don't need to pick somebody. There are several people running for controller, but they don't need to have had lots of fiscal experience. They need to, again, demonstrate to you an awareness of the city and an interest and a concern to be sure that our tax dollars are spent responsibly. So Scott Stringer, as controller, for example, has regularly exposed things that where he thought tax dollar money was being spent badly by the mayor and the mayor's agencies. And then Erica, you're also smart. The controller is responsible for investment of all of our pension monies, which by and large is done to maximize profit, because we all want to have money in the city treasury to pay the pensions of those of us who gave a lot of time to public service. But it is not an uncomplicated set of decisions. In the case of this controller, the city of New York has divested all of its money from fossil fuel companies and private prisons.
Thank you. So sadly, we're at time. Clearly, there's a lot more to talk about, as there always is. But I want to thank both of you. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Jodi. As always, it's a pleasure to hear from the two of you. This was an incredibly interesting discussion, and I really valued hearing how each of you would make your decision about mayor. So thank you for that as well. I want to let everyone know that we are going to take a 5-minute break, but you can just stay here with us. And then we will move on next to a session called Homelessness in Jewish Tradition and in Our City, a conversation with Rabbi Lauren Gravel Herman and Shams DeBaron, also known as the Homeless Hero. So I hope you will stay on and join us for that. And thanks again, Ruth and Jodi. You have a great evening.